All right, so next up, we are going to have Rich Casale and to talk about kind of give a high-level view of wildland fire impacts. And Rich is retired from the USDA Natural Resources and Conservation Service after 45 years serving that agency, and is now working on a contract basis. Rich was a district conservationist for NRCS and the Central Coast and has many years working on fire recovery issues. So Rich, thank you very much and take it away.
Thank you, and thank everybody for joining us this morning. Good morning to everyone. And yes, I'm also a certified professional erosion and sediment control specialist and have been for 40 years, working for NRCS, assisting NRCS in one number of capacities. I've assisted many property owners, all different sizes, from homeowners to large ranches, back into the mid-70s post-fire on numerous fires, and particularly in the last 5 years, all the fires we've had throughout California. I've been on many of them and have written many handouts and fact sheets and publications that are available on our NRCS website. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is available in written form. You can certainly email me, or you can contact NRCS directly, and the websites are at the end of my presentation. So I'm going to be speaking for the next 15 minutes or so on understanding wildfire impacts. To begin with, there's some overarching concepts I want to make sure everybody is aware of, keep in the back of your mind before deciding what to do and whether or not anything needs to be done at all. I always like to start with nature. I consider nature as our first and best post-fire restoration practice. Saying that, sometimes nothing is best. I know that's a hard pill to swallow for many, but it is a valid practice and sometimes the best thing that we can do. So we like to start off there. This is a photograph I took last year, about 3 or 4 weeks following the first rains in the Casale fire in Sonoma County. I wish I had the before picture of this, but basically everything that you see green in terms of the rangeland there was black and ash. And certainly you can see even some life coming back to some of the trees, although most of the trees in this area were heat or smoke damaged, and they will provide a lot of free mulch to us. So in terms of waiting on nature, that's one of the things that nature provides to us following fire is free mulch and free grass. A lot of grass seed is either sprouting from root systems, if they're perennials. There's seed bank in the soil that regerminates after fire. So we don't have to be too quick to think about aerial seeding or seeding areas that were torched by fire. So understanding some natural processes is important before, again, we jump to the chase and start thinking about everything that we can throw at the landscape following fire. Recognizing that fire is natural in the landscape, that nature is incredibly resilient given the chance. A lot of the practices that we do throw at the landscape after fire can actually slow that process down. So that's a very important point. For example, deep-rooted shrubs are providing more protection for slope stability after fire than new grass would. Let's keep in mind that since we have the time following these fires and previous fires I've worked on, even the Casale fire that was late in the fall, the Thomas fire in Santa Barbara I worked on, it didn't really go out until the first week of January. There was no time to plan. We have a little bit of time to plan. We don't have to be so quick to start removing anything from the landscape and making unnecessary disturbances. Recognize that soil erosion is a natural and land-forming process, and it's always going on. And it was going on underneath all the trees and brush and what have you on some of our fire-affected areas. So now it's going to just be a little more evident because we're going to be able to see it. And it will be perhaps more accelerated in some areas. The areas that were severely disturbed by the firefighting effort, where the fire burnt very intensely, where we have, deep ash and white ash on the soil and very little in the way of plant material left. Many plants are actually dependent on fire and regenerate as a result of fire. And some seed and plants will only come back after fire. So again, waiting on nature for plant regeneration and native seed bank germination is important, because these plants, like I said, are already there, as opposed to introducing something new. Not to say there's not a place for those practices. I may be able to touch a little bit on it in my presentation. There'll be others today that will also talk about some of these practices. So plants also in grasslands are stimulated and enhanced by fire as well. So some other things, I already mentioned leaf drop provides natural mulch, and the leaf drop is from typically plants that are not deciduous, but they're deciduous after fire because they were smoked or heat damaged. So if you're doing any straw mulching, for example, there's no need to be putting mulching under trees or around trees or any place that would be influenced by leaf drop or leaves being, blown over the landscape naturally. Ash, to some extent, provides some initial protection. It's very absorbent. It does develop a crust. It is a site situation. For people that are interested in seeding, again, I don't recommend it easily, at least on a wide scale, but where it is recommended, keep in mind that you can't really seed ash. Nothing will come up in ash. And generally, seed is much more successful when you have seed bed preparation. Well, guess what? Seed bed preparation involves disturbance. So that's, again, that's almost a whole presentation on itself. Burned plants provide soil and slope protection, particularly ones that were just singed or even ones that were completely burned. Maybe there's only a skeleton of the plant left. But anything that protects the soil surface or still has a root system is doing something important for post-fire. If a raindrop hits even a burnt plant or a leaf or a stone on the surface, it's taking the energy out of a raindrop that's hitting the soil at in excess of 30 miles an hour and splashing that and breaking up that raindrop in many pieces and spreading out as much as 5 feet in any given direction. Fire-related debris in channels and streams can also be beneficial. Again, that's something's a site-specific call. We don't typically recommend that everything be removed from the channels. In some cases, again, that's nature's way of maybe slowing water down naturally or collecting sediment in a place in the watershed that might be a better place than, say, around a bridge or something of that nature. So understanding natural processes is important, understanding the impact that the wildfire has had on soil, the soil type, the slope, understanding natural sheet flow of runoff, and trying to maintain or return that runoff to sheet flow. A lot of the fire breaks have rerouted natural drainage, and sometimes the water bars that are put into these fire breaks by CAL FIRE or the Forest Service actually concentrate and redirect and divert water unnecessarily. I've told landowners in many situations to remove the water bars or not to have CAL FIRE put them in at all. In many cases, removing the berms alongside the fire break to allow the water to stay in sheet flow is a much better idea. Understanding some of the basic erosion control, erosion factors, the importance of vegetative cover, the type of soil, the sandier soil types are more erosive, for example. Not only the steepness of the slope, but how long that slope is, has a degree of how much water and how fast the water is moving over the slope. The rainfall amount certainly is important, but rainfall intensity is probably more important. particularly after you've had ground saturation following rainfall events. And it doesn't take much to produce, well, it does take quite a bit to produce a debris flow, but in intensity, talking about intensity, the Montecito debris flow in 2018, there was a ½ an inch of rain that fell in 5 minutes. That's equivalent to a 6-inch of rain an hour in intensity. And that produced a horrendous, killer debris flow that killed 22 people. And obviously the human impact is an erosion factor as well. What we do or what we don't do or how we do it on the landscape is going to have an effect on erosion. So some of the impact on soil includes that the fires can burn hotter, the higher intensity fires. They can destroy plants, the complete plant, the root systems and resident seed banks. The lower intensity fires typically burn cooler. There's generally better, regeneration in these areas, but they can also smolder and they can still have a severe impact on soil biological, physical, and chemical properties. Can also affect soil nutrients, erosion hazard, can alter the water holding capacity and overall soil health, which is important to know, particularly if you are planning to do seeding or replanting or understanding how well nature is going to play a role in the post-fire landscape. The cumulative effects of these changes can modify soil productivity and biological diversity for several years. So I always recommend getting a thorough post-fire assessment by a professional, and NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and resource conservation districts throughout the state are very helpful, and they're a free source of information. They're non-regulatory organizations that provide confidential assistance. So that might be a good first stop. But these are some of the things that will be assessed on a property visit before any determination of what kind of practices, if any, are needed. So fire history, when the last time fire was in this particular, on this particular property is important, fire intensity and the severity, the degree of disturbance from the firefighting effort, where I tell folks that's a good place to start if you've had that, because a lot of issues arise following fire from the actual damage that was caused from the firefighting effort and dozer work. The presence of white ash, that's where it burned extremely hot, so the degree of damage is going to be higher in those areas. The degree of overall tree and plant loss, the damage to infrastructure, sorry for the spelling of that word, and the impact on soil and slopes. So these are some practices. The do nothing is using nature as your best management practices, as I mentioned earlier. No widespread seeding is really needed, particularly in wildland areas and larger open space areas, with the possible exception of range and pasture lands. And that's a case-by-case situation as well. Seeding may be advantageous around home sites, alongside roads and driveways, maybe as a buffer strip above important waterways. I like straw mulching, loose straw, no more than 2 inches thick, as ground protection, using rice straw or a weed-free or a weed-limited, a sterile cereal grain straw. Anyway, there are handouts and additional details on straw mulching that are available through the NRCS website, so I can't go into a lot of detail. But in many cases, that's all that's necessary. People always want to know, what about those straw wattles? What about erosion control blankets? What about jute netting? Well, here's an example of it done wrong. There's plastic laid on the background of another property in the background you can see in this picture. These wattles were placed on top of jute netting, and jute netting was placed on bare soil over cut plant material. And so Everything is done wrong here, and soil erosion is still going to occur underneath the jute netting. When you do use jute netting, it has to be on a very smooth and well-prepared slope, has to have good soil contact, and usually the netting is there to hold mulch in place. It doesn't do as the job that you want it to do unless there's mulch underneath it. Straw wattles need to be keyed in. These are not doing anything. They're just floating on top of the netting, and yet this landowner spent thousands and thousands of dollars for this job. So minimize tree cutting and plant removal. Many trees, if they're not presenting an immediate initial danger to life or structure, I would wait until at least next spring and assess whether or not they need to be cut at all. A lot of them will come back. So post-fire practices to really, spend some time and effort on are looking at drainage systems that have been impacted, including road culverts that may have been burnt out, which were probably plastic in some cases in a lot of our rural areas. Containing toxic debris early on before toxic debris removal takes place where structures were lost. Sometimes straw mulching and straw wattles can be helpful on sites that have toxic debris. There's also special stormwater filter socks that provide more filtration of toxic debris as well. Soil, and we talked about soil and slope protection, but monitoring and maintenance is going to be really important. Repair and damages from the firefighting effort, as I mentioned, you can see this is a water bar almost going up and down the slope, very loose soils. I would remove something like this immediately. This is not going to unnecessarily cause erosion. Lop and scatter is a way to deal with fire breaks with the material that was removed for the fire break. This is emergency practices that you need to use extreme caution with or not use at all. This is all the wrong things to do on a slope. And lastly, in summary, this is my top 10 list. 10, get help. Licensed experts, RCD, NRCS. Respect the laws of nature. When you control water, you control nature. So be very careful about diverting and concentrating water on the post-fire landscape. Note that one size does not fit all. So don't do what your neighbors do. They might be doing the wrong thing anyway. And early on in the process, folks start copying each other and we keep copying the wrong thing on the landscape. Every property is unique, has a different set of variables. Minimize those slope and soil protections. There's no urgency to remove plants in trees unless they create an imminent hazard to life and high value property. Work and look beyond your property lines, work with nature, just like fire, erosion, and runoff doesn't respect these property lines. So we need to look at the bigger picture. You need to protect property access. Emergency measures are high risk and oftentimes only provide a false sense of security. And practices need maintenance. Just recognize that everything is undersized after fire, culverts and drains and what have you. Doing nothing or less may be best. Consider nature as your best management practice. And there's no silver bullet. When it's not safe, it's not safe. It's important to have an emergency plan and more than one exit plan, including one of those exit plans being on foot if necessary. Thank you.